What the Industrial Revolution? Here we go. All right, and so in this lecture, we're just going to talk specifically about what it was. Like, okay, what exactly what it was. I mean, maybe you have some conception in your head about the Industrial Revolution, like you smokestacks, railroads. I don't know what you think about when you think about the Industrial Revolution. You should think that it's the most important event in all of human history, because of course it is. But we're in this lecture, we're just going to do nuts and bolts. Maybe a little boring. No, no, strike that. This will be a great lecture, I'm sure. Um, but what's really interesting is this is, as I said, maybe the most profound event in human history. But when you zoom in, it really happens in just this small area, and in this rather weird industry. Like if you're picking an industry to start modern economic growth as we know it, would you pick clothing, or would you pick, I don't know, the railroad or steam power, or I don't know, the printing press, something like that? But no, it's just clothes. Okay, and it obviously has this profound effect for England, or I guess I'm using the term Britain for the Isle here. Anyways, initially before the Industrial Revolution, we're talking. This is an island kind of off out of the way. This is like an afterthought of Europe. It's just this island off the coast, very small landmass wise, and population wise, it's small as well. So it's about it's less than 1% of the world's land mass and less than 1% of the population. But by 1850, it becomes this economic powerhouse. It's producing 2/3 of the coal, one half of the iron, one half of all the textiles, which is a fancy word for clothing. So because it unlocks innovation, it unlocks this process to to really develop technology. It becomes this economic powerhouse, and it uses that power. It uses that economic power to become a political power, an imperial power. All right, so this is the British Empire. The famous phrase, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." It comes from the fact that by the 1920s, Britain politically had control over all these red regions. Um, the sun actually still does not set on the British Empire. They still have enough like island properties spread throughout the world that it still doesn't sit on it. So they have this political power. This is a fun one. These are countries not invaded by Britain. The little yellow are countries not invaded by Britain. Okay. So they really, they become this economic and political powerhouse. That all of that comes from the Industrial Revolution. You go back to the colonial era, pre 18th century. The big colonies are all had by Spain and Portugal. England certainly has the American colonies, but the American colonies are not that great. I mean, the Northern American colonies, like the New Yorks, the whatever whatever the other ones. I'm not from the East Coast, New Hampshire, Boston, whatever, Massachusetts. Those ones are not they're not producing a lot of wealth for the home country. The South to some extent with its cash crops, but nowhere near the level of Brazil, or some of the Spanish colonies. So really, Britain has its colonial era, or really extends its colonial era after it undergoes the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution, this, as I mentioned, it's really starts in the textile sector, and so we can see these are our textile centers. They're primarily in the north of England, so it's actually primarily in a pretty small area, and we can see that this is the population growth. So at the beginning of the 1700s, fast forward to the 18 and 1900s, we can see this is really where the population is growing, up here around Manchester, of course around London, but really it's growing up here. So this is the hotbed. This little like northern area around Manchester is really the heart of the Industrial Revolution. You want to think about it as like Silicon Valley for textiles. And if we zoom in, apparently this is a town that claims that they are the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It has some incredibly British name like Shropshire on Shrewsbury or something like that. I forget, but anyways, you can, this is just I'm emphasizing that how what of a small area this starts in, and it really grows from there, and really jumpstarts Britain's success. Okay, so we're talking really about 5 specific industries that really undergo this technological advance. Textiles is the most important, as I mentioned. Later on, we'll get the steam power, iron and steel, coal mining, and the railroad. But we are really going to focus on textiles because that is the industry that gets the Industrial Revolution first. So, what a tease. We're going to talk about textiles after the break. Stay tuned.